Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome back from the ad break. You are still watching Prime Life. Now, we did mention that it's a beautiful Tuesday evening, and I am joined, or we are delighted to be joined by our wellness expert, Ronald Abvajee, and we are here to discuss an urgent need for greater awareness about substance abuse and addiction. As we mark SANCA Drug Awareness Week, Ronald will tell us about the devastating impact of drug addiction on individuals, families, and communities. But also, most importantly, we're going to be covering the importance of mental health awareness, especially amongst the teens and the young ones. This is also just to commemorate or keep commemorating the fact that it's still the month of June. Assalamu alaikum. Welcome back from. Did I just say welcome back
Yeah,
from
you
the
did.
ad break?
You got
Welcome to Prime Life. You come here so often, it feels like it's just an ad break and you're here again.
And when I come in early, then it's like, why are you here so early?
Why are you here so early? But thank you so much for joining
Always
us,
a
Ronald.
pleasure.
Welcome.
Thank you.
So, what are the signs of, symptoms of drug addiction amongst people? What are the signs that families and people that, are close to people that have drug addictions can look out for early?
Well, we look for things like big changes in behavior and patterns. So, for example, if you notice that there's a lot more sleeping during the day or not sleeping at night, if you notice there's massive eating changes, and you could say, but Ronald, that's symptomatic of maybe stress. If it's a stressful situation and time, you understand, but the minute it gets compoundingly worse, you've got to be very aware and mindful thereof. The next thing that we look at is fundamentally when the behavior around money and isolation increases. So isolation, more often than not, those that are addicted. Now remember, we're not talking about drug use, we're talking about drug and alcohol abuse and addiction. So with addiction, isolation tends to become a lot more common. And it's associated not with lack of care, but it's associated with really shame, with feeling shame because of their behaviors that they feel are out of their control, those individuals. And finally, something we need to look at is money. If you notice that money's disappearing, very quickly, things are being taken from the home and or office, and suddenly they're just disappearing, that's a cause for concern. Those are some of the key things we look out for.
So let's talk about the common factors that can trigger people to become, drug addicts and all of that. And I think earlier we mentioned the importance of mental health. Do you think it's also a contributing factor, especially amongst teens and young ones?
When we look at adolescents, teens, and young ones, we know that the World Health Organization has stated that 60% of substance abuse in adolescence is due to untreated mental health conditions like depression, anxiety, and overly stressed and distressed. I mean, that's scary for me.
It is.
So if we look at a classroom of two classes of 100 kids, 60% of them that are addicted to substances are because of that. So mental health and mental health awareness is absolutely critical to identify, to mitigate those stats. It's scary. The second thing that we look at is when you are exposed as a child to substance abuse within your family, you are 4 times more likely to become addicted to substances in your life. When you are exposed to it as a child, observing a parent, a brother, a sister, uncle, or aunt in your close environment. These are scary stats and these are scary facts. And the final thing that is some of the key trends that we've noticed amongst adolescents is that many people say it's because of peer pressure. That's no longer the case as the main cause. It's actually been shown to be youth unemployment coupled with feeling disconnected and not belonging in your community and or family. So it's actually disconnection becomes a gateway to substance abuse.
That is actually very sad, and I think it urges parents to be more aware or more observant of their children instead of just getting into a routine of, oh, we go to work, come back, and kids are here, and we don't actually look at the behaviors that you've mentioned to see if there's anything that has changed. Now, let's talk about the support services that are available, for individuals that may be struggling with addiction.
So the first thing that we look at is, you mentioned it in the intro, SANCA. So SANCA is the African National Council for Alcoholism and Drug Addiction. So when we look at SANCA accredited clinics, SANCA's got structured programs, protocols, and processes in play that these clinics need to follow. So as you know, it's not fly by night. Second thing is there's other rehabilitation centers that are also accessible and available. those become the first point of call and avenue. Secondly, for an individual and or a family member that could be impacted by that individual that's addicted to drugs and or substances, you have the opportunity to call SADAG. Then there's Narcotics Anonymous. These are toll-free call center numbers that don't cost you a cent off your phone. Whether you have airtime or data or not, you can still call those numbers and chat to a professional counselor to get immediate psychosocial support for yourself and or substance abuse support for yourself. And then finally, we need to look at our spiritual centers, from churches to mosques to madrasas to schools in communities, and really look at where are the champions of community care, and really rally around them and find out where are the other NGOs and those individuals that offer safety, support, and care.
And now let's talk about the impact that drug addiction can have on those from, unprivileged backgrounds, for people that are from marginalized communities, because we do see that, I'm not saying the other areas are not affected, but there's a lot more drug abuse that's happening in those kind of communities.
Absolutely. I mean, underserved communities are rife for drug abuse, and we see that. And it's not just what we think, it's what the statistics are saying. So when we look at that, it's to do with poverty, it's to do again with belonging, and it's again to do with the biggest factor of unemployment coupled with boredom, especially in adolescence. When there's nothing else to do with your time, you need to distract yourself, and it becomes a distraction mechanism and or a coping mechanism. If you can't provide food, you can't earn an income, you're constantly dealing with poverty, you're cold at night, there's no food on the table, you want to have a numbing mechanism. And often that becomes drugs and becomes alcohol and or other substances. It's substance abuse.
Yes.
What we need to be aware of in those communities is it's the reality that they face. Because drugs more often than not become cheaper, and that leads to ill behaviors to get the drugs in hand, which is why we find that substance peddlers are rife in those communities. So they thrive at the cost and the risk of those that are underserved. Then also we cannot forget women and the LGBTQI plus community, because they are often marginalized in treatment options. And that is scary for me. So they feel that they cannot go for those to certain rehab centers or treatment options because they do feel marginalized in that situation and circumstance.
Now, also another thing that's common is that when it comes to drug abuse, it doesn't only affect obviously the person that's taking drugs. The families, the community is often impacted by the behavior. Psychologically, mentally, it can also affect you if you're living with someone that is under drug abuse. Can you talk about the ways in which communities, family members can show support while also making sure that they're looking after themselves during that time?
Families need to, and I'm not going to tell people how to run their families. That's up to every individual and every family for themselves. But often families tend to ignore and neglect because they're either in survival mode or it's a very much of, I'm tired, I'm burnt out, just handle the situation. Watch TV, do this, do that. So it's almost like correspondence studies. You're still getting the title of family, but you're not sitting in a class. You're getting a textbook to learn yourself and or online classes. So it's scary for me. And when we look at this thing, we need to look at things like schools and things like spiritual centers, madrasas, mosques, churches, etc. Because that becomes a front line in communities to support not just those individuals that are dealing with substance abuse to stop, but also to support the families and the communities around that because they get impacted. But although it's a front line for support, teachers, mulanas, priests, pastors, they are not skilled and trained in managing substance abuse. They're not trained counselors. They're not trained mental health specialists. So they often revert to either a judgment and a discipline versus a support and a different mechanism that's clinically sound to support those individuals and families. Because it's easy to say tough love. It's easy. I often hear that.
Yeah.
But is tough love relevant or is tough love something that you've heard? And that is unfortunately where the skills are not there. This is why we need to do mental health literacy, substance abuse literacy, to inform those that are observing children, adolescents, and teens to be aware of these signs and symptoms and behaviors and how then to manage it as a first line, almost like first aid.
So before we let you go, as we wrap up the conversation, if someone is struggling with substance abuse right now, what are the first steps that they need to go through in order for them to start their journey into recovery?
And they need to be honest with themselves. Often the loudest conversation is the one between our ears, and no one hears that besides yourself. And that is a discussion that you need to face the reality of where you are. Second thing is, don't wait till you've hit rock bottom, if possible. Because when you've hit rock bottom, it is so hard. That's where your body, biochemically and physiologically, has been depleted. Your social capital with your family and your community is being depleted. And your isolation becomes a lot higher from a concentration perspective. So you do feel a lot more alone, compounding the mental health vulnerabilities. And finally, just take a micro step. Whether it be calling the call center of SADAG, of SANCA, walking into a rehab center, having an honest conversation with your family and or someone that you really trust. That's the first step that you take today. And tomorrow continue that first step and add another step to that, so that you can, of course, create these micro stacking of steps to take, where you are being honest with yourself and honest with those that care for you.
Ronald, thank you so much for joining us and just for giving us insight on this important issue.
Always a pleasure.
Viewers at home, that was an amazing conversation that we just had with our wellness expert, Ronald Abvajee, on the, just covering the issue of drug abuse amongst, teens and the young ones.